Neighbors knew this family. A tidy house, a mowed lawn, the younger children in the family who were seen in the yard almost every day. But when asked about Daniel, no one could recall when they had last seen him. One said, perhaps a year ago. Another, it seems, several years. He lived in this house. He hadn't left. Yet he disappeared without leaving his own family. October 14, 2001, a suburb of Fort Worth, Texas. An emergency call comes in that evening. A woman calmly states the address and reports that their son Daniel has not been eating for several days and can barely get up. Her voice is steady. The phrasing is precise. She doesn't rush or stumble over her words. There's no tremor, no pauses that usually occur when someone tries to compose themselves. Her intonation is as if she's dictating a shopping list. The 911 operator clarifies the condition, asks her to check his breathing, and recommends staying on the line until help arrives. The answers are short and calm. At one point, a sound is heard, either footsteps or something being brushed in the background. She doesn't get distracted. The conversation lasts less than 2 minutes and doesn't convey a sense of urgent threat.
The ambulance crew is dispatched immediately. The address is in a typical suburb, a quiet street, neat houses. Children are riding bicycles at the intersection. A neighbor has a light on their porch. Nothing indicates a critical situation. On the way, the paramedics review the call details: refusal to eat, general weakness. From the phrasing, it's clear that it concerns a young person. To the crew, it looks like a standard medical call. One of them makes a note on a tablet. The other looks out the window, noting house numbers. The ambulance stops in front of a well-maintained facade. The porch is clean. A rubber mat lies on the steps, neatly aligned with the edge. The doorbell works on the first press. The woman who made the call opens the door. She behaves reservedly. She doesn't fuss. Her hands are clasped along her body. She says Daniel is in the bathroom. She gestures the direction, but doesn't move from her spot. The house is clean. The interior is well kept. Family photos hang on the corridor wall. In the kitchen, the refrigerator hums quietly. Upon first examination, it becomes clear that Daniel's condition is not due to a sudden deterioration.
His appearance immediately causes professional concern. His height, build, and general condition did not match expectations. His appearance spoke for itself. He had clearly been treated far from gently. His skin is pale, almost gray. His eyes are half open, but his gaze is unfocused. One of the paramedics begins standard procedures, checks his pulse, examines his pupils. The second steps aside and contacts dispatch. He lowers his voice, but the words are clear enough. He reports that Daniel's condition indicates prolonged emaciation, not a temporary refusal to eat. Yet there are no signs of an emergency situation in the house itself. The atmosphere is calm. A vase of artificial flowers sits on the kitchen table. Not a speck on the floor. Nothing looks abandoned or neglected. This contrast is immediately noted, without further examination or questioning. The paramedic scans the hallway again. Drawings on the refrigerator, a calendar with notes. Everything is as it should be. The parents' version no longer aligns with what the medics see. The discrepancy between their words and his condition is too obvious. The woman stands in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. She watches the crew's actions, not Daniel. The senior paramedic decides to notify the police as what he has seen cannot be explained by a medical reason within the scope of a standard call. From this moment, the ambulance call in the Fort Worth suburb ceases to be routine and becomes the beginning of an investigation that will soon reveal what had been happening in that house long before the evening of October 14. After the information from the medics is passed to the police, a standard neighborhood check begins, not because the house looks suspicious, but because Daniel's condition cannot be explained by medical reasons over a day or a week. It's necessary to understand how long this has been going on and who might have noticed it.
From the outside, the house raises no questions. A quiet Fort Worth suburb, a neat facade, a mowed lawn. The grass is even, as if freshly trimmed. Toys lie in the yard, a plastic dump truck, a jump rope, a slightly deflated ball. Nearby, a small play area where neighbors gathered in the evenings. Swings sway slightly in the wind. Outwardly, it's an ordinary family home, no different from dozens of others on this street.
When official vehicles appear on the street, neighbors come out to watch. Someone freezes by their mailbox. Someone pretends to check their flower bed. For them, this is unexpected. This address had never been associated with problems. There had been no police calls, loud conflicts, or complaints here. During the initial conversations, neighbors described the family almost identically. Calm, polite, not overly sociable, but not reclusive either. They exchanged greetings, sometimes a couple of phrases. Their behavior didn't disrupt the general rhythm of the street. One neighbor mentions occasionally seeing the mother at the store. Another recalls holiday decorations at Christmas. Nothing special. The mother regularly appeared on the street with other family members. They were seen in the yard, at the play area, on the way to school. They were visible. Neighbors knew them. One woman recalls the youngest daughter offering her cookies on Thanksgiving. It was their presence that created the impression that everything was fine at home. At this stage, the police don't record anything alarming. The picture seems complete. The house leads a typical suburban life. In the morning, cars leave. During the day, the street is empty. In the evening, some return from work. Some go for a walk. Dogs bark. Doors slam. Everything as everywhere else. A turning point comes later, when conversations become more precise and concern specific individuals rather than the family as a whole. One neighbor says he hasn't seen Daniel in a very long time, not a month or two. By his estimation, several years had passed. He falls silent, trying to recall something. He shakes his head. This point is noted separately. The officer clarifies, asks him to recall exactly when. The neighbor cannot name a date, but confidently states it was long before this year. He looks at the house as if trying to see something he hadn't noticed before. Another neighbor confirms the same. He remembers the rest of the family well, but Daniel gradually stopped appearing on the street. He wasn't seen in the yard. He wasn't seen leaving the house. He simply disappeared from general view. The neighbor shrugs, says he hadn't even thought about it. This is where the inconsistency arises. The family continued to live in plain sight. The others regularly appeared on the street. The house didn't look closed off or abandoned. But one person from this family had been absent for years, and no one could precisely explain this absence. Previously, simple explanations had been found for this: illness, homeschooling, living with relatives. These versions sounded plausible until they began to be compared with each other and with what the medics saw inside the house. Now they fell apart. From this moment, for the police, it became important not only what happened on the day the ambulance was called, but also how long Daniel had been out of the public eye. The normal outside world ceases to be background and becomes part of the investigation, because it was precisely this that allowed what was happening to go unnoticed for several years. In the emergency room, doctors immediately note that Daniel's condition did not arise in recent days. The very first measurements show abnormalities that do not develop quickly and are not explained by a short-term refusal to eat. He is transferred to the intensive observation unit. The gurney rolls down the corridor. The wheels squeak slightly on turns. A nurse holds the IV drip. Standard procedures are performed. Height, weight, vital signs are measured. Samples are taken. All of this is entered into his medical chart, without comments or assumptions. Test tubes line up. A marker squeaks across the labels. Data is noted in the chart, followed by numbers that cause serious alarm.
The indicators did not meet expectations. His condition spoke for itself. The nurse's gaze lingers on the numbers. She double-checks. The numbers don't change. After the initial examination, doctors formulate diagnoses. Alimentary dystrophy, severe dehydration, signs of internal organ atrophy. The body is systemically emaciated. This doesn't look like the result of a single failure or a recently started illness. Each item is recorded on a separate line. Half of the chart page is filled. Separately noted are signs that he had been treated far from gently. These marks are not fresh. Some of them have already healed. The medical chart indicates that no treatment was administered when they appeared. The nature of these injuries does not fit a single accidental episode. The doctor makes a note in the margin, underlines it twice. Before drawing conclusions, doctors check for possible alternatives. Congenital diseases, metabolic disorders, rare syndromes are considered.
Lab results return one after another. None of these versions are confirmed. The clinical picture remains unchanged after all checks. By this point, the senior physician of the department joins the examination. He reviews the entire chart, from the first measurements to the lab results and condition description. He turns the pages slowly, goes back to one of the sections, rereads it. His conclusion is formulated discreetly and without emotional assessments. Such a condition cannot develop on its own and is not related to genetic causes. It develops with prolonged and systematic nutritional restriction. This conclusion is officially recorded. The wording is chosen to reflect medical facts, not assumptions about motives. Until this point, the discussion was about a severe condition. Now the documents include an indication of external actions as the cause of what happened. The senior physician contacts the police. He reports critical emaciation, signs of severe mistreatment, and the absence of a medical explanation that could account for these indicators. His voice is steady. No unnecessary words. This is not an emotional call or an accusation. It is a formal medical alert.
At the same time, the parents continue to insist on their version. They speak of a rare illness and claim that Daniel refused to eat himself. The mother repeats the same phrases. The stepfather nods in sync with her words. These explanations find no confirmation in the medical chart and remain merely words. The doctors do not engage in arguments. They continue to record data. Every measurement, every diagnosis, and every inconsistency remains in the documents. A pen glides across the paper. Numbers line up in columns. These very records will later form the basis for all further conclusions. By the end of this stage, it becomes evident that this is not about a sudden deterioration or a temporary problem. Medical data points to a process that developed over a long period and required continuous decisions from adults. From this point on, the main focus for the police is not the search for an illness, but reconstructing exactly how Daniel lived before being admitted to the hospital and who controlled his living conditions throughout those years. The medical report gives the police grounds to examine the family's explanations.
Until this point, they were regarded as one of several versions. Now they need to be documented and compared with what is already reflected in the records. The conversation proceeds calmly, without pressure or accusations. The detective simply asks them to recount what had been happening with Daniel in recent years and how the family explains his condition. The office is small. A folder with papers lies on the table. A voice recorder is on. The mother begins first. She speaks confidently and coherently. According to her, Daniel has a rare metabolic disorder. She claims he had long refused to eat and barely reacted to attempts to feed him. She attributes any changes in his condition to the specifics of the illness. Her hands are clasped in her lap. Her posture doesn't change. The stepfather confirms what she said. His account almost entirely repeats the mother's words. The same phrasing, the same explanations. He doesn't add new details or correct what was said, but merely supports the version already voiced. Sometimes he looks at his wife as if checking with her. The detective asks clarifying questions: when they first noticed problems, where they sought medical help, who had seen Daniel before. The answers remain general. Clinic names are not given, doctors' names are not recalled, timelines sound vague and don't form a clear chronology. The mother pauses, looks at the ceiling, says she doesn't remember exactly. At the same time, the parents' behavior draws attention. They show almost no interest in Daniel's current condition. They don't ask about prognoses or treatment. They never utter words like, "How is he?" or "When can we see him?" The entire conversation boils down to repeating one version without deviations or clarifications. This is recorded in the protocol as an observation without evaluations or conclusions. The conversation ends quickly. Detectives express no doubts and don't argue. At this stage, it's important for them to preserve the original phrasing to later compare it with facts. The voice recorder is turned off. The folder is closed. In parallel, doctors continue the examination. An X-ray is performed as part of the standard procedure. The machine hums. The plates line up on the negatoscope. The images are sent to a radiologist for bone condition assessment. When the results are ready, the radiologist notes several areas. Traces of injuries are visible in the images. They belong to different periods. Some of them have already healed. Others appear more recent. The injuries are distributed in such a way that they cannot be explained by a single incident or accidental fall. The radiologist traces a finger across the image, shows it to a colleague. The colleague nods silently. The radiologist indicates that the injuries formed at different times and were not accompanied by proper treatment. This conclusion is formally documented in writing and attached to the medical records. Signature, stamp, date. At this moment, the parents' words confront objective data for the first time. Neither a rare illness nor refusal to eat explains the presence of multiple injuries of varying ages. The detective compares the medical report with what was said earlier. The parents' account remains the same. No new explanations emerge. The discrepancy between words and facts becomes documented. This is not yet an accusation or a final conclusion, but from this moment, the investigation gains its first solid footing. The medical images become the first piece of evidence that changes the direction of the inquiry and compels the police to carefully examine what had been happening with Daniel long before his hospital admission. After the medical conclusions, discussions about versions recede into the background. The focus shifts to the people who were with Daniel every day and made decisions for him. The house where the family lived was not isolated. Other family members were there too. Neighbors saw them. They went out onto the street, played in the yard, went to school. Their backpacks lay in the hallway. Their voices were heard in the evenings. To outsiders, this looked like ordinary suburban life. Against this backdrop, Daniel's situation stands out sharply. He lived in the same house but existed separately from the general rhythm. He was almost never seen. Over time, his absence ceased to be noticed at all. For detectives, this becomes an important point because it concerns different conditions within one family, one house, one set of walls, different lives. The investigation is led by the Fort Worth Police Department, and primarily attention focuses on the mother and stepfather. They were responsible for household matters, nutrition, and seeking medical help. The presence of other family members in the house only underscores this responsibility. Detectives check their backgrounds, work, education, residency history. The mother is in her early 30s, several ordinary jobs, a store, an office, a store again. The stepfather is approximately the same age, stable income, driver's license, nothing immediately striking, ordinary people with ordinary documents. Then they look at official records, No criminal records, no complaints from neighbors, no calls to social services at this address. Prior to October 2001, the system recorded no alarms. Databases are empty. Lines are clean. The longer detectives study the documents, the stronger the disconnect feels. On paper, everything looks calm. In the hospital, a condition is recorded that cannot appear suddenly and does not fit the parents' explanations. These two worlds do not intersect. They return to their words again. The version remains the same: illness, refusal to eat, no other reasons. Now these explanations are heard against the backdrop of medical data and how the others in the same house lived. Police officers clarified details of daily life: who was home during the day, where Daniel usually was, who monitored his routine. The answers sound confident, but remain general and don't form a coherent picture. The mother looks slightly to the side. The stepfather drums his fingers on his knee. At some point, it becomes clear that there's nowhere further to go with documents and words. Medical facts speak of a prolonged process. Official databases don't explain how it could have continued for years. Only one place remains where everything can be seen without external interpretations: the house. That's where they decide to go next. Detectives prepare a search based on medical conclusions, X-ray images, and discrepancies in the parents' explanations. This is not a sudden move or an emotion, but a logical continuation of what has already been recorded. By this point, the investigation moves beyond the hospital. Ahead is the examination of a house that looked ordinary from the outside, but inside might conceal the answers to how Daniel lived alongside others and why his conditions turned out to be so different. While the search warrant documents are being prepared, the police take another step. Detectives speak with other members of this family, those who lived in the house and saw what was happening every day. The conversations take place in the presence of a social worker. The room is bright. A glass of water and colored pencils are on the table, without pressure or harsh phrasing. It's important to understand what ordinary life looked like behind closed doors, without versions or guesses. At first glance, everything looks calm. Those living in the house are well-groomed, active, and answer questions freely. Clothes are clean. Hair is neat. This contrast is immediately striking, especially when keeping in mind Daniel's condition as recorded by doctors at the hospital. To general questions, the answers sound similar. According to them, Daniel was often ill and spent almost all his time separately. These words are repeated several times as if it's a familiar explanation that everyone has long grown accustomed to, like a memorized line. When the conversation turns to details, the answers become more cautious. Pauses appear. Gazes shift away. Phrases break off, as if speaking further is uncomfortable or frightening. Fingers fidget with the edge of a t-shirt. A leg swings under the table. The social worker gently redirects the conversation to everyday moments: where Daniel was during the day, what happened if he made noise, who visited him most often. Her voice is steady, almost bored. That's how one asks about the weather. It is at this moment that one of the younger family members utters a phrase that changes the entire conversation. Calmly, without emotion, she says that Mom got angry when he made noise in the closet. These words are spoken without explanation. For her, it's not a confession or a complaint. It's simply a memory, recounted as matter-of-factly as any other detail of home life. She picks up a pencil and begins to draw. The social worker doesn't stir. Detectives record the phrase verbatim, without clarifications or comments. The pen hovers for a second above the paper. Until this moment, the discussion was about illness and isolation. Now, a specific location emerges. Not an abstract room or a separate space, but a closet. This detail immediately sets the direction for further actions. It requires no interpretation and needs no emotional assessment.
It indicates exactly where to look for confirmation of what is already reflected in the medical documents. By this point, the police have a comprehensive picture from various sources: medical conclusions, X-ray images, and words spoken from within the family. All of this converges at one point. The house search ceases to be a formality and becomes a necessary step to verify a specific location. After the words spoken during the family interview, one point becomes crucial for doctors and police. Before the search, any influence from the parents must be excluded and Daniel allowed to remain calmly under observation. The next day, in October 2001, an official decision is made at the hospital. It is formalized through the Tarrant County Protective Services with the participation of Fort Worth Police. Parents' contact with Daniel is temporarily restricted during the investigation. The document is signed at 3 in the afternoon. The document is read aloud in the presence of hospital staff and police. It is not about deprivation of rights, but a temporary measure. The basis is simple and clear.
Medical conclusions, X-ray images, and testimonies obtained from within the family. The reader's voice is steady, monotonous. Legal language doesn't imply intonation. The reaction of the mother and stepfather turns out to be unexpectedly sharp. Almost immediately, the conversation escalates into a conflict. Voices are raised. The mother takes a step forward. Her hands clench into fists. Accusations of unprofessionalism are directed at the doctors. Their actions are called illegal. The stepfather repeatedly states that no one has the right to interfere with their family. He stands up, sits back down, stands up again. The mother talks about complaints and lawsuits, saying that the hospital will regret its decision. The conversation quickly devolves into demands and threats. Her voice gets higher, words merge together. However, one detail catches the detective's attention. Throughout the entire dispute, the parents barely speak about Daniel's condition. They don't ask about treatment. They aren't interested in prognoses. Not a single question about how he feels. The only thing that remains at the center of the conversation is the lifting of the restriction and the return of control. Staff try to keep the situation calm. Doctors explain that the measure is temporary and related to the need to stabilize his condition. Police officers remind them that the decision is enforceable. A security guard moves closer to the door. This does not change the parents' behavior. The detective records what's happening without comment. He is interested not in the conflict itself, but in the emphasis placed. In a stressful situation, the parents repeatedly talk about their rights, but not about Daniel's well-being. He makes a note in his notebook, underlines it. These observations are not considered evidence, but in combination with medical facts and previous testimonies, they add another nuance to the overall picture. By the end of the day, tension at the hospital subsides. The restriction remains in force. Parental access is terminated. All necessary formalities are completed. The corridor empties. The light in the office goes out. Now that family influence is excluded and key moments are recorded, the police can move forward. The next step leads to where, according to family members, that very place inside the house was, and where it remains to be verified what was happening behind closed doors. After obtaining the warrant, the police proceed with the house search. On the morning of October 17, 2001, detectives from the Fort Worth Police Department arrive at the address in a Tarrant County suburb. Cameras are on. All actions are recorded from the moment of entry. A red light blinks on the casing. From the outside, the house looks well maintained. The yard is tidy. Toys lie by the entrance, a plastic shovel, the bucket, a ball. Nothing distinguishes this place from other houses on the street. Curtains are drawn. The morning sun strikes the windows. Inside, the setting is the same. Clean, tidy, furniture arranged. In the kitchen, order. Dishes in the drying rack, a towel on the hook. In the living quarters of other family members, beds are made. Books and clothes are on shelves. A teddy bear sits on the windowsill.
These rooms look as expected in a normal home. Detectives inspect the house systematically. They check the bathroom, kitchen, corridors, open cupboards, look under beds.
The search proceeds calmly, without haste. At this stage, nothing is found that would indicate a separate, isolated space. Deep in the corridor, the pantry door attracts attention. It's a small room, not intended for living. Upon inspecting the door, detectives notice a detail that immediately stands out. Everyone freezes. A bolt is installed on the outside of the door. The fastening is checked on site. The metal is cold. Scratches on the frame indicate frequent use. The bolt is securely fastened and positioned so that the door cannot be opened from the inside. This moment is captured on video. The camera zooms in. After this, the decision is made to force open the door. Behind it is a confined space, approximately 1 meter by 1.5 meters. No windows, no lighting. The darkness is such that eyes don't adjust immediately. Walls and floor are covered with traces of contamination. On the floor lies a thin mattress, compressed with stains. A plastic bucket stands nearby. Nothing else. A strong smell of ammonia is felt in the room. It hits the nose from the first second. It indicates regular use of this space, not that it had been closed for a long time.
One of the detectives covers his mouth with his hand. Detectives record the dimensions of the pantry. It's impossible to stand upright here. The ceiling hangs low. The space is not designed for a person's prolonged stay. The tape measure clicks. Numbers are recorded. Forensic specialists are called to the scene. The room is cordoned off with yellow tape. Measurements are taken. Photo documentation is done. Flashes illuminate the corners. The condition of surfaces and the placement of objects are noted. Each detail receives a number. The contrast with the rest of the house is obvious. Outside the pantry, order and neatness. Family photos on the walls. Clean towels in the bathroom. Inside, a confined space with signs of constant use. 2 worlds separated by 1 door. By this point, the police already have medical data, testimonies from family members, and now a specific location that directly correlates with the previously heard words about the closet. The search continues, but the key element of the investigation has already been found. The discovered space explains the duration of Daniel's condition and confirms that what was happening was not accidental. From this moment, the investigation moves to the next level. All further actions will be built around what was discovered behind that door. After the search, the seized items are sent to the Tarrant County Forensic Laboratory. The examination takes more than 1 day. Work proceeds in stages as results become available. Boxes of physical evidence line up on shelves. Each is labeled. The mattress from the pantry, swabs from the walls and floor, and the metal bolt from the door are sent to the laboratory. Each item is registered separately, indicating its place of discovery and time of seizure. Barcodes are affixed to bags. Forms are filled out by hand. The mattress is examined first. It is thin, without a cover, with clear signs of prolonged use. The foam rubber is compressed to the consistency of cardboard. Analysis shows biological contaminants characteristic of a person's regular stay in a confined space without access to sanitary conditions. Based on the composition and distribution of the traces, experts conclude that this refers to a prolonged period. Not days, not weeks. Concurrently, the walls are inspected. Numerous touch marks are recorded at Daniel's height level. They are scattered irregularly, without a clear direction. Such a pattern is characteristic of constant contact with walls under conditions of severely restricted movement. No traces of adults are found in this room, only small prints, only one size. The absence of conditions for normal living is separately noted. In the pantry there is no light, ventilation, or personal belongings, no books, no toys, no blankets.
The only exit is a door, lockable from the outside. Measurements confirm that it's impossible to stand upright there. A person could only sit or lie down. After the completion of the main examinations, the materials are handed over to the forensic medical examiner. He compares the results of the laboratory tests with the medical data recorded at the hospital. Daniel's indicators correspond to the conditions found in the pantry. The numbers match. The picture forms. The conclusion states that the identified conditions directly explain the recorded state. Versions of illness or genetic malfunction find no confirmation. Document signed. Date. Seal. By this point, the police have a consistent picture.
Medical data and expert examination results complement each other and point to the same conclusion. After this stage, the investigation moves to the next step. Now it's not about verifying facts, but about the adults' actions and their legal assessment. After the appearance of a lawyer, the defense strategy becomes clear almost immediately. All responsibility shifts to the stepfather. He is presented as a harsh and controlling man who supposedly made key decisions in the house. The mother, in this version, appears as a dependent figure, unable to influence what was happening, a victim of circumstances. This position is formally documented and submitted to the investigation. Detectives do not argue or comment. The version is accepted for verification. The folder is updated with new pages. They start with the stepfather's past. They check previous workplaces, interview colleagues and acquaintances, look up old addresses. They inquire about his behavior at home and in conflicts. The answers converge on one point. He was a difficult, abrupt man, but no one describes signs of total control over his loved ones. A former neighbor says, "An ordinary guy."
Nervous sometimes. These testimonies are recorded and added to the materials. Concurrently, work with seized media continues. During the search, the mother's phone was seized from the house. The device is sent for digital forensics along with other materials. Upon data analysis, specialists reconstruct correspondence with a close friend. The messages are dated from a time when the stepfather was not yet living in this house. The correspondence is not taken out of context. It spans months, hundreds of messages, years. In these messages, the mother regularly complains about Daniel, uses harsh phrasing, writes about irritation and the desire to keep him separate from the rest of the family, calls him a burden, a hindrance. These words appear long before the other adult came into the house. For the investigation, this is an important detail. The timeline shows that the mother's attitude formed earlier and is not linked to the stepfather's influence. The timeline does not lie. After this, the version of the stepfather's sole responsibility is not supported by the collected data. The investigation shows that what was happening in the house cannot be explained by the pressure of one person. After this, investigators consider the actions of each adult and compare them with the already established facts. By this point, investigators already understand the conditions in which Daniel lived and the decisions made by adults. The next step is related to what long remained beyond the facts. Why, in this family, he was the one who ended up isolated. The work begins with studying the family history. County family court archives, marriage and divorce documents are consulted. Dusty folders, faded seals. The materials record the mother's first marriage to Michael Kavanaugh, concluded in the late 80s. Daniel was born of this marriage. The divorce was finalized in the early 90s when he was just a few years old. The relationship between the former spouses ended conflictually and without further contact. This data is confirmed by court documents and family case materials. Property division disputes, accusations,
counterclaims. The mother formed a new union significantly later.
The other family members appeared in the second marriage, in the latter half of the 90s. This division is clearly traceable in documents and confirmed by testimonies from family acquaintances. One from the first marriage, the rest from the second. People who had visited the house recall that Daniel was rarely seen with the others. He almost never participated in general family life and was rarely mentioned in conversations in the presence of outsiders. One acquaintance says, "I didn't even know they had an older child." She shrugs. During the search, in addition to digital media, the mother's personal belongings were seized from the house. Among them were several notebooks and notepads kept in the bedroom, in a dresser's drawer, under linens. These materials were later examined as part of the case. The notes consisted of disparate handwritten entries made at various times. They were not systematized and did not appear to be prepared for others' eyes. The handwriting was uneven, inks of different colors. In these notes, the attitude towards Daniel is consistently revealed. The mother calls him Michael's copy, referring to her ex-husband.
In other places, he is referred to as a reminder and the cause of all my problems. These phrases recur over several years and appear long before the events of 2001. The tone of the entries is even and cold. These are not bursts of emotion, but a settled perception that had persisted for a long time, like a report, like an accounting of hatred. For the investigation, this becomes an important explanation. Within one family, Daniel was an outsider. He was perceived not as an individual, but as a link to a past marriage and a conflict that his mother had never been able to resolve. It becomes clear that the discussion will no longer be about motives, but about the decisions made by adults and what they led to in practice. Investigators move on to questioning those who lived in the house. Lauren and her husband are summoned on the same day. They are separated into different rooms and not allowed to meet. The corridor between them is 30 meters with a closed door. Each conversation is recorded, with the time and sequence of answers noted. Lauren is called for questioning first. After standard explanations, the investigator almost immediately moves away from general formulations.
Photographs of the pantry, taken during the search, are placed on the table one by one. First one, then the next. A pause is made between pictures, allowing for details to be examined. The silence in the room becomes palpable. She looks at the images for a long time. She is silent for several seconds. Her eyes do not move. Then she says she barely remembers how everything was arranged. She adds that it was always difficult to keep the house tidy. According to her, Daniel often interfered, did not obey rules, and had to be put away so that the others could live peacefully. The investigator asks for clarification on what she means. Lauren does not answer immediately. She looks at her hands. She says it was temporary, only when he behaved badly. She emphasizes that it was not a permanent measure. Her voice is even, almost mechanical. When the conversation turns to how long he was there, her answers become vague. She says she cannot give exact durations. She repeats that it was for a short time. When asked to describe a typical day, she returns to the same phrases, adding no new details. The circle closes. After some time, the conversation touches on how Daniel ate.
At first, Lauren confidently states that he ate with everyone. Then, after a pause, she adds that the portions might have been smaller. She explains this by saying he scattered food and made a mess. When the investigator asks who made this decision, she answers evasively and suggests moving to the next question. Her fingers tremble slightly. Several hours later, Mark is questioned in another room. He's shown the same photographs, in the same order. He begins to speak almost immediately. He doesn't wait for questions. He explains that he didn't take key actions and tried not to interfere with what was happening in the house.
According to him, the initiative came from his wife, and he agreed to avoid constant conflicts. Unlike Lauren, he speaks in more detail. He explains that the pantry was bolted shut to prevent Daniel from leaving at night. He mentions a mattress lying directly on the floor. He says food was given to him separately to avoid seating him at the common table and creating tension. He states these details calmly, without noticeable pauses, as if describing garage repairs. The investigator compares his words with what was said earlier.
Where Lauren speaks of rare instances, Mark describes a consistent routine. He claims it was like this almost every day. These discrepancies are immediately noted. Two versions, the same events. After this, Mark is read excerpts from personal notes seized during the search. The wording is harsh. They speak of a copy of the ex-husband and the cause of all problems. The investigator clarifies the dates. These entries relate to a period when Mark was not yet living in the house. He falls silent and does not answer for several seconds. He looks at the table, then at the wall. Then he says he had not seen these notes before. After this, Mark no longer insists on his previous version and begins to explain in detail in which situations Lauren made decisions and at what point he stopped interfering. The conversation drags on. The investigator returns to the same episodes, asking questions differently each time. The answers change. Details diverge. Previous statements no longer align with each other. Contradictions multiply. By the end of the interrogations, it is clear that Lauren's and Mark's accounts do not align and cannot be reconciled into a single version.
These discrepancies are too precise and repetitive to be explained by coincidence. Next, all their statements begin to be checked against the existing case materials. After the interrogations, investigators' attention focuses on the hospital. A specialized expert is invited to where Daniel is under constant observation. Not in the format of a survey or a conversation. At this stage, no one demands answers or asks direct questions. The goal is different: to understand if he is capable of making contact at all, and how he does it. The first meetings pass almost in silence. Daniel does not speak. He avoids eye contact and remains aloof. He sits in the corner of the bed, knees drawn to his chest. The specialist does not rush or push him. Instead of questions, there are paper and pencils. They explain that he can draw anything that comes to mind without rules or judgment. The pencils lie in a neat row on the table. He looks at them for a long time. After a few days, the first drawings appear. The same details are repeated in them. A large house, clear walls and windows. Inside, several figures, drawn confidently. Bright colors. Smiling faces. And separately, a small figure in the corner of the sheet, enclosed in a dark rectangle with no doors or windows. Black pencil. The lines are thick, pressed down. This motif appears in almost every drawing, regardless of the assigned theme. The observing specialist does not comment on anything aloud. He notes size, placement, recurrence. The house takes up almost the entire sheet. There are many figures inside. The dark rectangle is always enclosed and always separated, as if on another planet. Over time, Daniel begins to respond to requests. He is asked to show who is where in the drawing. He first points to the house, then the rectangle. He does this calmly, without hesitation. His finger stops on the dark square. When asked to explain what this place is, he remains silent. He withdraws his hand. He looks away. A breakthrough occurs during one session, when cards with images of food are placed on the table. This is a standard set for associative work. Apples, red.
Milk. Cookies. Daniel looks at them and selects a portion, removing the rest. His movements are careful, precise. When asked to explain his choice, he indicates that the food was not meant for everyone and was related to behavioral assessment. He speaks softly, almost in a whisper. This remark is recorded by the psychologist without clarification or further questions. The session concludes calmly and without pressure. The pencils are put away in the box. The report is prepared later, based on the drawings and observations. It notes, access to food in the family was used as a method of control and reward. Food deprivation was constant and depended on behavior, not on chance. The conclusions are based on visual materials and Daniel's words. Before this, the investigation only had documents, records, and conflicting adult testimonies. Now, something has emerged that does not depend on their words and cannot be explained by misunderstanding. The next stage concerns the specific steps taken in that house and how they were recorded by the investigation. By mid-March 2002, the investigation no longer felt that the case needed to be pieced together. The materials already included medical reports, expert examination results, hospital specialist reports, and recorded discrepancies in adult testimonies.
All these elements began to converge. The picture became complete and less dependent on anyone's words. On March 18, 2002, Lauren and her husband Mark are summoned for official notification of charges. The procedure proceeds calmly and without unnecessary explanations. The charges are read out sequentially, point by point. The reader's voice is monotonous. Legal language does not tolerate intonation. Lauren listens in silence, barely changing her expression. Her hands rest on her knees. Her fingers are clasped. Mark visibly tenses, clarifies the wording several times, and asks for a pause to speak with his lawyer. The very next day, March 19, Mark, through his defense, indicates his readiness to cooperate, without public statements or immediate attempts to shift blame. This concerns a deal in which he undertakes to provide full testimony in exchange for mitigating his responsibility. The investigation accepts this signal and records the terms. The documents are signed that same evening. Mark gives his first detailed explanation on March 21, 2002. His account does not appear emotional or self-serving. He speaks calmly, adhering to chronology. He states dates, describes how roles were distributed in the house, and who made key decisions. He emphasizes that the initiative came from Lauren. He indicates the period when the restrictions became permanent and explains who monitored their observance. He specifically details daily life in the house. He describes where Daniel was during the day, when he was allowed to go out, and at what times access to other rooms was restricted. He meticulously describes how food was used as a means of reward or deprivation, depending on behavior. His voice is even, pauses are short. These details align with what was previously recorded at the hospital and reflected in the drawings. Investigators verify what was said, step by step. They cross-reference dates, sequence of events, and minor domestic details. No significant discrepancies are found. Mark's testimony does not contradict medical data, expert conclusions, or search results. In parallel, the evidence is presented to Lauren. She refuses to admit guilt and continues to insist on her own version. Her voice is confident, her gaze is direct. However, by this point, her narrative no longer appears coherent.
Some episodes are refuted by documents, others by her husband's testimony. The overall structure disintegrates into separate, unrelated fragments. By the end of March 2002, the investigation has a reconstructed chronology of events, an understanding of how roles were distributed, and a clear picture of who controlled what happened in the house for several years. From this point, the investigation moves to reconstructing the specific sequence of events within the house. The reconstruction begins with the morning. Based on adult testimonies, medical data, and expert conclusions, a consistent picture emerges. The day in the house began outwardly calm and habitual. The other family members gathered in the kitchen, had breakfast, discussed ordinary household matters and plans for the day. The clinking of dishes, the smell of coffee, voices. For them, it was a standard morning, without tension or conflicts. Daniel was not included in this routine. His presence in the general life of the house was not taken into account or discussed, as if he didn't exist. Most of the time, he was in a small utility room. This space was originally used as a pantry and was not intended for human occupancy. 1 meter by 1.5 meters. No windows. No light. Access to it was controlled by adults. The possibility of leaving did not depend on the time of day and had no fixed schedule. Everything was decided situationally, according to mood, according to circumstances. During the day, he remained there alone. Any sounds were perceived as a violation of the established order. At such times, conditions became stricter. This conclusion is based not only on testimonies, but also on medical data. Doctors later recorded traces of old injuries sustained at different periods. Their nature indicates repeated harsh treatment, coinciding in time with the described periods of isolation. By evening, the situation only partially changed. The ability to get food depended directly on how quietly he had behaved during the day. A plate might appear, or it might not. This routine was repeated regularly. It did not appear to the adults as an emergency measure or temporary solution. It was a habitual control mechanism integrated into the daily life of the house, like cleaning, like laundry. The behavior of the other family members is analyzed separately.
From the testimonies, it becomes clear that they were accustomed not to interfere and not to ask questions. What was happening was perceived as an established norm. Over time, attention to this completely disappeared. The isolation of one family member ceased to be seen as something requiring explanation. That's how it always was. That's how it is. As a result, the investigation sees not isolated episodes, but a stable system that existed for years. Everything in the house was subject to these rules. They were maintained by silence, habit, and the fact that what was happening ceased to be perceived as exceeding acceptable boundaries. This reconstruction records the main point. Restrictions, isolation, and harsh treatment were applied consciously and consistently. This specific order is confirmed by the case materials. At this stage, the investigation has a complete picture of what happened in the house, structured by time and actions, and this is sufficient to refer the case to court and begin the next stage of the process. Court proceedings begin on March 12, 2003, in the Tarrant County District Court, Texas. The process is held in closed session.
This is a standard measure for cases of this type. The prosecution and defense, representatives of social services, experts, and witnesses are present in the courtroom. The benches are almost empty. There are no journalists. The prosecutor begins with a chronological account of events. He takes the court back to how life was structured in the house for several years. The materials include photographs of the premises taken during the search, medical reports, specialist reports, and excerpts from interrogations. All elements form a single chain and complement each other, without contradictions. The prosecutor's voice is even. The facts speak for themselves. The floor is then given to the doctors. They explain in detail what changes were recorded upon Daniel's admission and how this data correlates with the conditions established during the investigation. It is specifically emphasized that the detected condition developed gradually, rather than emerging in a short period.
These conclusions are supported by examination results and the dynamics of recovery. Numbers are projected onto the screen. Graphs. Tables. After this, the court hears Mark's testimony.
He confirms the key episodes he spoke about earlier and describes the distribution of roles in the house. His words align with what is already recorded in the case materials and expert conclusions. No significant discrepancies arise. He speaks softly. He looks at the floor. Lauren's defense strategy revolves around the version of a mental disorder, which the defense had pursued during the investigation phase. A previously conducted psychiatric examination is submitted for the court's consideration. According to its findings, specialists conclude that Lauren was aware of her actions and could control them. This conclusion is read aloud in the courtroom and appended to the case materials. The defense does not object. After several weeks of hearings, the court proceeds to closing arguments. The prosecution insists on the maximum penalty, pointing to the systemic nature of what occurred and its duration. The defense limits itself to attempts to soften the wording without disputing the factual aspects. The arguments sound formal. There is no energy in them. The sentencing takes several minutes. The judge reads slowly, each word distinctly. Lauren is sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, with transfer to the Mountain View Unit Women's Correctional Facility in Texas, designated for those convicted of particularly serious offenses. Mark receives 30 years of imprisonment and is sent to the Telford Unit Correctional Facility, where those convicted of particularly serious cases under agreements with the investigation serve their sentences. Lauren does not move. She stares straight ahead. Her face is immobile. With this, the judicial part of the case concludes. The decision solidifies the legal assessment of everything that was reconstructed during the investigation and summarizes the events that for a long time remained hidden behind the outwardly prosperous facade of the house. After the verdict, the story does not end. The court closes the criminal case, but for those who lived in that house, everything is just beginning. What follows is recovery, without cameras and without publicity. Daniel is transferred to a specialized rehabilitation center. Recovery proceeds slowly and under constant medical supervision. Nutrition and physical activity are introduced gradually, first broths,
Then porridges, then solid food. Any changes are monitored daily. It is not a quick process, but the progress is considered stable. Graphs creep upwards. Numbers change. In parallel, Child Protective Services decide to fully remove all family members from their former home. Their future fates are considered separately, and contact between them remains limited and only under the supervision of specialists. A foster family is selected for Daniel, prepared for long-term work with the consequences of his trauma. The process takes months and occurs without publicity. Documents, interviews, checks. Later, rare photographs appear, taken outside the context of the case. In one, Daniel is on a swing. In another, he holds ice cream. They are not accompanied by comments and exist as confirmation that recovery proved possible. The case itself remains in professional circles as an example of how selective harsh treatment can go unnoticed for years in an outwardly prosperous family. The verdict closes the question of responsibility, but provides no answers to everything else. To how it could have continued for so long, to why no one noticed, to what was happening in his mind all those years. This is precisely what makes such stories particularly difficult to uncover. Outside, a mowed lawn, toys in the yard, children riding bicycles. Inside, a locked door at the end of the corridor, and the one who ceased to be seen.